Welcome back to the Wild Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Finnig. I'm super excited for our guest today. She's a dear friend of mine. In fact, I love when we get to record here at the Village Recording Studio in Broad Ripple in Indianapolis, because sometimes my guests get to go to breakfast with me, or maybe I'll have lunch with them afterwards. And we got to go to breakfast this morning, and we should have had a microphone at breakfast and record our conversation. So hopefully we'll dig into that again today. My friend Erin McDonald is the owner of Pelvic Floor Indie. And so I've already warned our producer, Brian, that we will probably say the word vagina and other words at least 100 times today. So, so just be open-minded. We're going to talk real talk about being a woman, femininity, connecting to our pelvis, and why so many women are disconnected from their pelvis, and men, and what connecting to your pelvis and your root wisdom really means. We're also going to talk about, the real issues that happen when the pelvic floor is too weak or too strong, and some yogic and Pilates approaches to that as well. And we're going to see where the conversation takes us. So hopefully this will be very insightful. I do want to remind everyone I have an 8-week yoga for depression and seasonal affective disorder yoga therapy program coming up in January at my studio, Embark Yoga in Indianapolis. So if you're interested in joining, if you tend to get the blues during the winter time, check that out and go to embarkyoga.com/events to find out more. So let's dive right in. Erin, thank you for being on today. I really appreciate it, and so excited to have breakfast and convo this morning. So now we're going to dive in deeper. First, I want to know, and sharing with our audience, a little bit about your background. What led you to holistic practices, working with the pelvic floor, the pelvis, all of this stuff?
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for breakfast. I always like to eat.
Right.
I don't really know what brought me to it. I had gone through yoga teacher training at City Yoga. I had never intended to teach yoga. I had a niece who was pregnant, and I asked a cousin who I knew was into pelvic floor stuff from her mom's Christmas letter. I didn't know what that meant, and I asked her what my niece should do before she has this baby, and she told me pelvic floor Pilates. And so I started checking that out. I thought, well, who teaches it here? No one. What is it? I don't know. So I went to Canada and got trained in pelvic floor Pilates. I came back ready to teach, ready to help people, and it was way too exercisey. So I just started making my own kind of thing and started incorporating breath and awareness and visualization, all different kinds of things from my yoga training that I thought were necessary. So I started doing that, and it was like, well, I feel like I'm missing stuff. I tried to read as much as I could, and then I found Leslie Howard. Mm-hmm. And she was doing exactly what I wanted to do. She was incorporating breath work. She was incorporating meditation. She was incorporating other things into the pelvic health routine more than just movement and exercise. And so I got trained with her and have sort of evolved this into my own thing that involves lots of different facets of healing, of talking, of research, of awareness. And so I think that I was supposed to do this for 2 reasons. One reason, I think, to be a crusader. I'm passionate about women's health, women's pelvic health especially. Not that I'm not into men's pelvic health, but women is what I know. And I see the damage, and I get very fierce about it, and I'm supposed to be educating women. Whether that helps them or not, I'm supposed to be educating them about what's going on. The bottom line is that. The second reason I think I was drawn to it, we talked about this morning, because it was just a sudden realization, is that I think I needed it for my own healing. And I think I was numb for many years, probably most of my life. My pelvis was numb, my heart was numb, my body was numb. But because I didn't have any issues, I thought it was okay. Mm-hmm. So whereas most people come to these holistic modalities because they're broken, mm-hmm. because they're sick. I didn't have that. It was like I just sort of stumbled upon it. It was like, oh, this is cool. I never imagined 10 years ago that I would be saying vagina and pussy and all of those things on a daily basis, but I do. And I'm becoming who I am. And that's the real me. And I think I was supposed to find this to uncover the real woman inside of me that I've not known, because she's been buried under a whole bunch of crap that society's thrown on me.
Yeah. And that I especially want to dive into today. Um, let's take a step back and talk about a little bit of work with Leslie Howard, and because I know you combine those two aspects that you talked about. You know, healing the physically, you know, when women come to you with different issues, maybe prolapse and all kinds of stuff, but also, you know, the reconnecting as a woman. I know I incorporate that in my practice as well, and that whole reconnection to the wild feminine. So let's take a step back, because of you, I hosted Leslie Howard at Embark. Was it the first year I was open?
Yep.
And we were packed. We had at least 30 women there. And she's recently come out with a book, and we'll make sure that we link to that in our show notes so that everybody can access that. And do you have the book? Do you think
I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
Okay. I need to get the book too. But her insight during that class, and obviously, you know, when you went for training, was very helpful. But I remember specifically someone coming in, and she actually showed up the day before and realized it was the next day, but her uterus was prolapsing, and she went to the top mesh doctor, and of course, like, I think he told her, well, you'll have to put some mesh there or you'll never have sex again. And I was taken aback that someone was told that, which we could go down a rabbit hole of like all those stories we know. We won't go into all that, but she wasn't given any alternatives, and she had to seek those out for herself. And luckily, I believe her acupuncturist told her about the pelvic floor workshop with Leslie and about your work. And I recommended her to you and to Maria for my abdominal massage. And I'll link to that as well. And but I just remember she was just so ecstatic to learn that there was something else she could do. And I know all of those women were. And I'm thankful and that you are bringing that to the forefront. And I know that's ever evolving and ever increasing, but people really need that. So tell me a little bit, and so we can share with the audience just a little bit about, you don't have to go into detail of the pelvic floor. We can always link to that. But your experience of what women are coming into, and then we'll dive into the more of connection to our root wisdom.
So I'm typically the first person a woman will see. She may have told her doctor, probably not. She may have told a sister or a friend what's going on. Somehow has found me. I may or may not be the right option for her healing, but I hope that I provide at least a safe and comfortable space for her to tell her story, and know that she's not alone. That's the biggest part for me, is to know they're not alone. There's shame in our reproductive organs, that area of our body anyway. Women don't say the word vagina. They don't say the word vulva. They don't say those things. So there's this inherent shame. So then when you have an issue, say you're peeing your pants, or you're fecally incontinent, or your uterus is falling out of your vagina, or your rectum is prolapsing out your anus, those are not easy things to talk about. Mm-hmm. And who do you go talk to about them? Or maybe sex is terrible. Maybe you don't have an orgasm. Maybe it's painful. Things that are hard to talk about. So I see women with all of those issues, because so much happens in your pelvis physically. It's where, your bottom half of your body connects to the top half. It's where your pelvis is. It's responsible for you bending, moving, twisting, turning. Then there's all the muscles that go along with those bones. All of this stuff can be wonky. Then you have all the organs. So there's your elimination, urine and feces. There's your reproduction, your uterus, your ovaries. There's your sexual being. So there's so much that can go on down there, and it's all crammed in this tiny little space. And so maybe someone with irritable bowel syndrome has a pelvic floor issue. Maybe someone who's chronically constipated or chronically has diarrhea. They don't think about those things relating to the muscles at the bottom of your pelvis. And so for me, I hope to be the person that at least makes them aware maybe of what's going on, aware so that they can then go, whether it's with me or whether it's with a doctor or a surgeon or whoever, physical therapist, they can go in and be knowledgeable about what's going on, demand the care they deserve, whether you have to hit 5 people to demand that care, and not be dismissed, as well as be able to describe it in a way that's helpful for someone else to help you. Instead of just saying, oh, it hurts down there. Oh, you can say, I have pain on the front wall of my vagina when I have sex. Well, that's a very different description for a doctor than it hurts down there. So, like I said, I'm usually the first person people see because they're embarrassed, they're ashamed, and it's not easy stuff to talk about.
Yeah, and it's not. I mean, the fact that most women aren't even talking about it, and men don't either. But most women aren't even talking about it, and then they luckily find you, and you're like one in a million. So it's just this shameful thing. I had a client, because we were talking about, because I always joke with my clients that I'm going to make a t-shirt called that says it's always the pelvis. And there's a lot of t-shirts I'd like to create, but because it always is. And I work more with the energetics of it rather than complete physical work. But it's always the pelvis. And then, but I had a woman, she's like, my mother just told me all of that was shameful. And that's what I was taught. And her mother probably taught her that, and her mother before, and whatever, because it's a societal thing that gets passed down, rather than embracing and finding our power within our root, our pelvis, and which we'll talk about. But it's good for women to know that there are alternatives, that these things can be talked about, this is, I told you earlier, why I created this podcast, so we could share things. And that I always encourage our guests, share a little bit about yourself, because you might resonate, even if it's with one woman out there, that you'll open something up for them so that they can heal. I mean, I know personally for me, like I dealt with yeast infections for years in my 20s. Years.
And you would never think that was connected necessarily to possibly a musculature problem or an emotional problem or a spiritual problem. You don't, and who do you see about that? You go to your doctor, and your doctor's like, oh, yeast infection, here's another pill. Or maybe it's a UTI that's not even an infection. So then your doctor says, oh, really, nothing's wrong with you, but you have these symptoms all the time. Well, who do you go see?
Exactly.
Who do you talk to about it? A urologist isn't going to do anything for you. The pelvis is so complicated, and I think that's part of what complicates this. And then when you throw the shame and embarrassment on top of it, it's what we don't talk about. You have heart pains, you go to the doctor. You break your arm, you go to the doctor. You see a growth on your hand, you go to the doctor. We don't look at that part of us. We don't touch that part of us. We don't explore that part of us. We certainly don't talk about it. So then how do you even know what's normal for you?
Exactly.
So it's just so complicated from so many different areas.
Well, and before we move kind of more to the energetics and the femininity part of it, let's talk about Kegels.
Okay.
Versus other exercises, and we don't have to go in, you know, it is all audio, so
right,
go into everything.
So,
but a lot of times people think, oh, you need to strengthen your pelvic floor, and I know we've had conversations.
That's the panacea. That's the cure-all. That's the pill. You go to a doctor, you have an issue, they say, do these Kegels. They hand you a piece of paper that may tell you how to do it, and then you're expected to go home and just do these things. first off, someone needs to show you how to do it. You need to be in touch with your pelvic floor to know if you're doing it right. Most women are pushing. They're not doing the right musculature movement. They're not pulling up and in. They're pushing. They're taught to, stop your flow of urine. No, don't ever stop your flow of urine. That's not good. And there's a whole set of women, I would say 75% or more of the women I see, that's the exact wrong thing for them to be doing, because they already are holding too much tension in their pelvis. So if you're already holding too much tension in your pelvic floor and then you continue to train those muscles, it's like if you have a really tight hamstring and you go to the gym and all you do is hamstring curls, you're just making that muscle shorter and shorter and tighter, not necessarily even stronger. It's just becoming a way less functional muscle, because a functional muscle is strong and flexible.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the exact wrong thing for a whole lot of people to be doing. And I don't think they're bad inherently, but, they'd be like, when you come to a stoplight, just sit there and do Kegels. Well, okay. I prefer using pelvic floor engagement, a Kegel, whatever resonates with you, with movement and with breath, because I find it to be way more impactful if you're doing that or any exercise, any movement with intention. It's way more productive. You're involving more than just those muscles. You're involving your head and your heart and your spirit when you have that intention of what you're doing. And so while they're not inherently bad, they're wrong for a huge majority of women at a current point in their healing, and way more effective if you do them with intention.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. And one last thing I always find fascinating is the dome of the pelvic floor tied to the dome of the diaphragm. You want to explain that a little bit?
So also less tied to the arches of your feet and sort of your cervical area, roof of your mouth, top of your head, but definitely tied to your diaphragm. So your pelvic floor moves a little bit on its own. It should. Maybe it doesn't because it's not healthy, but it should, and it should move with your breath. And so part of why I teach pelvic floor engagement with breath is because you're using your breath to help that movement, to spur that movement. So when you inhale, your diaphragm moves down, so it creates space for your lungs to expand. All the stuff in your guts sort of moves down because it has to create space for that diaphragm to move down and your lungs to expand. And in that, your pelvic floor moves down. And so then on your exhale, diaphragm moves back up, pushes the air out of your lungs. The stuff in your belly moves back up. Your pelvic floor moves up. So as you breathe, your pelvic floor should be moving a little bit. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not something you feel. It's not like when you take a deep breath, you're going to feel it. But those two things should be working together. And that's how you can sort of maximize your work with your pelvic floor, is really engaging it with your breath. And sometimes that breathing is very opposite to what you do in yoga. It's very opposite to what you do in Pilates. It's not necessarily the normal way your breath works when you're doing it with intention and movement. But it's so much more powerful when you use your breath to facilitate that movement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and just the whole using the breath to connect back into the body. And just like you said, muscles should be strong but flexible. And so that's what we're looking for our diaphragm and our pelvic floor, so they're not overly contracted, stuck, which I see a lot, and then just flowing with the breath. And so using techniques to access that is different than, yes, of course, what we're going to do every day of our lives, but sometimes we just have to get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because a lot of women I see just aren't connected to their pelvis at all. And I start out looking just structurally like, wow, your universal plumb line is not even there. And so sometimes it's even just getting even pelvic tilts or what seemingly might be simple, it is really hard. And so then also getting the breath down there is very hard, or challenging. It might be a better word. And I know in my work I have to incorporate that. I don't do all the pelvic floor stuff that you are experienced in, but just the connection. That's what it's usually the energetic connection of working with the pelvis. And that's come more and more up into my practice that I told you I'm going to study more holistic pelvic care because it's so essential. And so this ties us into that second thing you were talking about with connecting with our femininity and our root wisdom, which is captured in our pelvis. Mm-hmm. And the work of the Wild Feminine by Tammy Lynn Ken, and who I mm-hmm. hope to study with. And that, I mean, she just blew my mind and I know that you recommended that book a long time ago, and then someone else did. And finally I read it and I was like, this is exactly what's happening. This is what's for me, for all my clients. It's exactly what's happening. And, I'm so glad that you had the epiphany and you're like, this is happening. We know, but sometimes it connects at some point. And I see that with, we were trained to be nice. That's mm-hmm. what I love in Women Who Run with the Wolves. Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes talks about. We were trained to be nice before we were 5 years old.
Good girl.
Yep.
Be a good girl.
And also not to trust our intuition.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's huge.
And so that is really what we're working towards, because when we've disconnected from the pelvis, we've disconnected from our intuition and trusting ourselves. So do you want to go into a little bit about your epiphany and what you're realizing, and then we can dive more into all of that.
The awareness is so huge, and it comes in stages, like you said. Sometimes it starts probably with a more physical, with the way you're carrying your body, the way you sit, the way you stand, what kind of shoes you wear, what kind of clothes you wear, what you eat, what you drink, and how that might affect the health of your pelvis. And even that we become very unconscious to, because we sit all day in the car, we sit all day at the office, you lose sight of it. So I try to help bring awareness to those things. We lose sight, do you wear heels every day? Do you wear a Spanx every day? Those things all impact physically what's going on. And then there's sort of how we interact with the world. And that's where all the crap comes in. The be a good girl, the have a flat stomach, the you shouldn't, you shouldn't be too slutty, but I want you slutty this time, but not this time. All of those contradictory things, messages that we get as women that lead us to sort of add layer upon layer of disguise to who we really are. They're these masks that we have to put on to be successful, to be in society, to be accepted. You're a good girl. You do this, you don't do that. And those things start to live in you. Mm-hmm. They take up residence, and then it's the crap that we put on ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's our own head, our own spirit, our own emotions that are judging ourselves, probably based on what's been put on us, but it's still the conversation that we have with ourselves. We're not worthy, the shame, the guilt, all of those things that we feel because I enjoyed sex, I didn't enjoy sex. All of those emotions that we feel then start to impact us energetically, mm-hmm. impact us emotionally. Words have great power. Mm-hmm. So women hearing certain words that might trigger them, whether it's slut or whore or abortion or cunt or whatever those things might be, it may be a good trigger, it might be a bad trigger. You don't know. Goddess. There's all kinds of words that we hear, and they hit us. They hit us in our soft spots. And for me, and I had this realization last night, which is, it just is ironic and
it's perfect timing.
It is. So I was the good girl, went to a private school, did all the right things, had good grades, went to college. I was the good girl. And, but there was part of me that didn't want to be. Mm-hmm. And I allowed the good girl to take over. Was in an abusive relationship, so I really allowed the good girl to take over. It was my cross to bear. I chose him, so I have to fix him. I have to. I'm in it, so I have to stay in it. I have to take it. Got out of that relationship and was in another relationship with a decent guy, but I was good girl because I didn't want to ruffle the feathers. I think that so many years of being in an abusive relationship, then I didn't want to rock the boat. So then I was extra good girl. I was only going to enjoy sex so much. I was only going to, I was always going to be agreeable. Whatever you want, honey. What do you want to eat? And in all of that, every time any of those things happened, I just shut down a little bit more. I closed off my pelvis. I closed off my heart. Everything just closed up because it all was getting hurt. So got out of that relationship, realized it was my fault because I wasn't demanding how I wanted to be treated. I was allowing how I was treated to be okay. So it wasn't his fault. He didn't know any better.
And it's true. I'll never forget when my grandmother said, because I was dating someone who, and he, for all intents and purposes, he was a good guy, but there was just this a little bit of demeaning happening. And my grandma said, "Will you allow it?" And I was pissed at my grandma for the truth bomb that she always gives. But it was true.
Absolutely. I emailed this boyfriend. We had broken up, and I emailed him. I said, "I'm not mad at you anymore." And he's like, "I didn't know you were mad at me." And I'm like, I realized it wasn't your fault. You couldn't give me what I wanted if I wasn't asking for it.
Exactly.
So then I went through a period where I was just completely numb. And in my egoic head, I was above it all. I didn't need a man. I didn't need attention. I didn't need anything. I was fine by myself. I'd always suffered with depression, so that was another layer on this wonderful cake that I was building of crap and
of lessons.
That they are lessons now. That was crap then. So I just shut down. I shut down completely. And then I had, my mom died and things got unleashed. And I think when the grief started coming up, it brought up all the stuff that I had repressed for all of those years, for 20 plus years. It brought up the hurt. It brought up all of those things. And then what I realized last night is that that's why I do what I do. The woman that I was 10 years ago, who wasn't going to say vagina, who wasn't going to say pussy, would not be having these revelations that I need to get rid of all those masks. I need to get rid of all that crap that's been heaped upon me of what I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to look like, how I'm supposed to act, and be who I am, whatever that looks like. I don't know what she looks like. I see glimpses of her occasionally, but I don't know what she looks like. And I'm trying to be curious and trying to allow, and it involves a lot of conversations with my body. And you know, I get that people sometimes are weirded out by the woo-woo. And sometimes, you know, it's like you'll see things posted where, yes, you know, I collected my menstrual blood and I drank it or I planted it, and this is my connection to my uterus and my femininity and my womb. And I'm here to tell you, it doesn't have to be that. It can be that extreme if that's what you want, if that's what you're into, that's beautiful. But if it's just laying in your bed before you go to sleep, checking in with your body, going, toes, how are you? Feet, how are you? Ooh, that knee's sort of funky. Okay, pelvis, how are you? And it might give you an answer, it might not. It might take a while. But it's just that checking in with your body, making sure it's not numb. I've had experiences where I've checked in with my body and my energy's stagnant. My chakras are gray, not one thing's moving. And when that happened, I freaked out. I was like, what do I do? But I wouldn't have known that had I not been checking in.
There's such a wisdom in the body. And then I know you are too, just a huge proponent of, we have to listen. We have to check in. And too often we get disconnected, not only from the pelvis, but the
All of
entire
it.
body.
All of it.
And all the that's why I love yoga. I mean, it's been transforming for me and for the women I work with, because the practices connect you with your body. It's a coming home in a sense. And then going even deeper of the, oh, left hip, what's going on? And it's a strange practice at first, but then you start to connect, because when you dismiss a part of you, or like like, oh, dang it, knee, why are you hurting again today? But that's dismissive of a part of you,
Right.
instead of going, what are you trying to tell me? And that's a completely different way of thinking. But I'm a firm believer, the things that happen to us, the injuries, or the moods, the like your mother passing away, those things come because they are shifting something for us in our lives. And I know that is true for you, because we're friends and we've talked about that. But things happen to help us grow, shift, and learn, even though they may not feel good in that moment, but they are really happening for reasons.
What can we learn from these things?
Mm-hmm.
What can we learn? What can we learn from our bodies? And the other thing is, I think, especially with your pelvis, what's your normal? You know what your normal is for your hand or your arm or your elbow or your shoulder, maybe even your lungs or your heart. You know what your normal is. Mm-hmm. But because we don't deal with that part of ourselves, we have no idea what our normal is. So you don't know what your abnormal is. You don't know when you're out of whack. So it's just having that conversation with your body. And it doesn't have to be the woo-woo conversation. It can just be checking in. It can be like, how you doing? What's up? Just laying there and seeing what you feel with no judgment. Just laying there, okay, I feel this. Okay, does it have a color? Does it have a shape? Does it have a sound? Do you feel a certain thing? Is it hot? Is it cold? Just seeing, being curious about your body. And I think that's one of the things that I'm trying to embrace actively, is being curious about movement, being curious about what feels good and what doesn't feel good. Just being curious about what's going on in my body and what it wants, because it will tell you.
Oh, it totally tells you.
If you are quiet enough in your head, which is again why I teach breath, which is why I teach meditation, breath work to my clients. To be aware, to change your body, you have to be aware. To be aware, you have to be able to hear what your body's saying. To hear what your body's saying, you have to calm that mind and that ego down a bit to hear that message. So it's all connected. And that's what yoga does. It calms the mind enough that you can tune into your body and hear what it's trying to tell you. And we don't do that enough. And I think our body's not only our body, but I think it's also our intuition. It's all these messages that we have inside of us. We have the answers. We just sometimes don't ask the right questions, and sometimes we don't hear.
And it's totally true. I had a client I was working with yesterday who, and I guided her through some meditations, and she realized what she was feeling. This was new for her, but trying to get in touch with the emotions in her body, that all the feelings where she found them in her body were where she hurt physically, on the physical level. And it was profound for her. And she also realized she had been going through just living in a state of fight or flight for so long, and I told you this at breakfast, like that the moments of peace that she's found now that she's been tuning into her body and working through things, and it takes a while, she's so desperate to get back there. And I said, well, it will become really like a real thing with more practice and more of that, like you said, tuning in and slowing down, quieting the mind. And when you talk about the body being, you're going to laugh at me when I say this, but the body being it's your intuition, especially your pelvis.
Yep.
So when I started doing that work for myself, I would joke with my friends of like, my uterus is a magic 8-ball. I will tune in and, like, should I go out with this guy? Should I be doing this with my career? Should I, blah, blah, blah. And I will sometimes sleep on it and ask again. But the more you tune in and you're aligned, you're like, oh, no, that doesn't feel right in my gut or in my womb or whatever. But oh, yeah, no, this is totally what I'm supposed to be doing. And I feel it wherever. It could be in your heart, it could be wherever. And the body will totally tell us. And so that's why both of us, just huge proponents of connect with the body. And when you connect with your body and make friends with yourself, like you become the woman that you're meant to be, or the man that you're meant to be. But just knowing yourself more, and then you can connect with others on a more profound level as well, because you know yourself and you're not protecting. You can connect more fully, or some of the things we were talking earlier of, it really enjoy the bliss feelings and not block it. So just to some final thoughts, I always like to share with our audience some strategies they can start connecting with their pelvis, whether it's physically or even seeking out help. Obviously, we'll link to your website, and we mentioned Leslie Howard's book and the Wild Feminine book. We'll link to all of that in the show notes. But are there any specific things that people could start connecting physically or even energetically to their root? Anything that you think of?
Two other books I think are really great. I think anything by Christiane Northrup is tremendous, because she's a doctor, but she's also very in touch with the spiritual, emotional side of things, of healing. So I think her Wisdom from Women's Bodies, I believe it's called, and then she has a book on menopause that's really great. I think those are really great resources to have in your library. The other book, which is a bit out there, maybe a bit out there for most people, it's called Cunt. It was written 20 plus years ago. But she has some really interesting perspectives on things. Like one year she spent only reading things written by women, only listening to music by women, only seeing movies that were done by women. And to think of how great that might shift your perspective on things, I think is tremendous. So it's a sort of out there book, but there's some interesting things in it. I think awareness is huge, whether it's having those conversations. I'm a huge proponent of vaginal self-massage, of checking it out. It's yours. It's no different than a breast self-exam. Look at it. Pull a Kathy Bates from Fried Green Tomatoes. Pull out a mirror and look at it. What does it look like?
I love that you just shared that.
Touch it. And if you're not comfortable at this point touching it, touch it outside your clothes. Is there pain? Is there tenderness? What does that feel? Does it bring up emotions? What does that do for you? Then move to on top of your underwear. Then maybe move to the outside but no underwear. Then you can start moving in, and it's yours. You have to know what your normal is. Is this cervical discharge normal? Yes or no? Well, if you've never paid attention to it, you have no idea. So I think that's a huge thing for me, is knowing those things. Again, you can't guide a man to how to pleasure you if you don't know how to do it, or if you don't know what feels good because you don't ever touch yourself, or because you've never touched yourself. I think that's part of it. I think that's a huge part of it. I think seeking out guidance is another part of it, whether it's me, whether it's my abdominal massage, whether it's a physical therapist who specializes in women's physical therapy, whatever it might be, there's resources. And I think you have to be dogged in your persistence. If something is wrong with you, do not let anyone tell you you're wrong. Whether it's a doctor, a professional, they have letters behind their name, I don't care. Don't let them dismiss you, because like you said earlier, that's our intuition. And when we finally, after 40 years, I finally listen to my body, and then I go to see a doctor and he says, nope, nothing's wrong with you, then I stop listening. And then you have the cycle continuing, because then that dismissive professional has made me feel like I can't trust myself. Well, that's bullshit. You are the only person you can trust. So I think seeing those professionals, and until you get an answer, until you get help.
until you find the right match for
Yes,
you.
absolutely.
That's supportive and nurturing and not dismissive.
Absolutely.
Because it is all about, and I've had guests talk about this before, it's connecting the mind and body and taking your health back into your own hands. Not dismissing the expertise of professionals, but finding the right professional with the right expertise that matches for you. And that's where you also use your intuition of, do I feel comfortable? Do I, does this person care about me? Or is this person dismissing me? But even a lot of times, just like in relationships, we might rationalize, well, but this person knows more, or this person's this way, or this person, we can do that with a professional. Well, but this person has these letters behind his or her name, but they only have their perspective. They have lots of training, but they only have their perspective, and your needs may be very unique. And if you keep searching, and again, one reason why I created this podcast, so that women and men out there, but we work with primarily women, can know that there are other things, and there are so many other things.
Absolutely.
That there are other things that can help them, and that they're not alone. Because oftentimes, especially when we talk about the pelvis, it's totally, well, I don't want to talk about that. I'm so shameful. I can't believe something's going on. I must have done something wrong, or whatever. Or just not even knowing, because our mothers didn't teach us, which they may not have been taught either. And so it's very important to, if you have an inkling or an inclination, you may not have the expertise to know what's going on, seeking out the expertise, but also being diligent and know when it, a primary example is with my dog Ellie. I was told, well, she has some aggressive behavior, you may just have to manage it. And I was like, no, like, there's got to be a different way. I'm not into just band-aids over symptoms. How do I get to the root? And so we have to do that with our own health. How do we get to the root? What is the underlying issue?
And we as women are dismissed so often in our society about everything, about whether or not we've been sexually abused, whether just our opinions in general, dismissed if you don't look a certain way. So you can't allow yourself to be dismissed when it comes to your health.
Correct.
I mean, you can't allow yourself to be dismissed in any way, but especially when it comes to your health, and you cannot allow that to dampen your belief in your own intuition. It just, you can't. And I know, like you, I like lots of tools in the toolbox. Not everything works every day. For my depression, not everything works every day. So I have to have other resources. I have to have professionals that are there to help me. Maybe medication, maybe yoga, meditation, breath work, all of these different things that I can call them. Music. Music's a huge one. It's like if I'm feeling funky and a great song comes on, I'm not feeling funky anymore. It has huge power. So it's like, can I then use that purposefully to pull myself out of something that's funky? Feeling that, moving your pelvis, getting up, just doing hip circles. Just hip circles. You don't have to dance. You don't have to exercise. Just move your pelvis. Hip circles, side, side, front, back. Figure out how your pelvis moves. Doesn't move. Maybe it doesn't move very well. And just explore. And I know it seems weird and it feels weird. And I had a realization recently too, where I was letting other people's attention of me, lack of attention of me, Facebook comparisons, I'm less than. I was letting that get to me. And we talked earlier about the voices you hear in your head, what you know is real, and what you know, and what's maybe your brain just spinning a tale. And I knew this voice was real because usually for me it's very brief, it's very to the point, and the what I heard was, I'm fucking amazing. And I've never been one for like affirmations because I felt dorky doing them. But when this came to me, it's like, because it came from me to me, it was the right thing. And now whenever I start feeling that niggling sense of you're not enough. You need to do this. You would be better at this. Someone else is better than you at this. I'm fucking amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you mentioned earlier, and this is a great tool for our audience to think about, is that when we start going, that monkey mind starts happening, and we're just all of those thoughts, and maybe they're going down the negativity rabbit hole or self-deprecating rabbit hole, or you can't make a decision or whatever. That's usually the mind taking over. But when the body takes over, it's usually succinct and to the point.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this.
Yes, and
Listen.
this. And so that is an example of your intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And often we can override it because our mind's like, hey, no, but I'm here to survive. And
but let me tell you the story about that. No,
exactly.
I don't know.
So we're looking for the story underneath the story, and it's usually very succinct. And that's what we really need to start listening to. Mm-hmm. And that's why the yoga and meditation practices, the quiet practices, help us make space to get clear so that we understand and can listen.
So you can hear that, so you know that that's really what you're hearing.
Exactly. So thank you, Erin, for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. The insight that you can give, I know will be very helpful for women all over the world who listen to this podcast. And I love learning more from you all the time. And, our lives evolve. And so it'll be interesting to even see more how your work with pelvic health evolves. And so again, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we're here every Thursday. And just one last reminder about my upcoming Yoga for Depression and Seasonal Affective Disorder yoga therapy program at Embark Yoga. If you're suffering from the blues or any low mood during the winter time, or just looking for something else, even if you're suffering from chronic pain, looking for something else to lift you out of your current state and give you some tools, we talked about tools in the toolbox, then check out my 8-week series that starts January 8th at Embark, embarkyoga.com/events. And as I mentioned, all of the things that we talked about in today's show will be linked in our show notes. You can go to alyssafinnick.com/podcast and click here to listen. And we'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Wild blessings.